Hi everyone. Hi everyone. um, Welcome back to Aurelia's virtual book club. I am discussing The Stain by Charlene Jones. I was kind of hoping she would be able to make it, but I guess since it's the middle of holidays, stuff happens. Um, I can't say I loved this book because it's not the kind of book that you love. um, it deals with difficult topics and issues of colonialization and women's rights and women's empowerment and all of that in a very good way. It's very well written. I really enjoyed reading it, but it was difficult at the same time. Um, so hmm, where to start? I learned so many things. I took so many notes, which is kind of strange for reading a novel. um, but I was gonna forget everything if I didn't write it down, so I wrote it down. Hmm. I thought it was really, I thought it was really fascinating how Charlene talked about the way that Diana, she had this traumatic experience where this guy held her. It's the opening scene, I think. Held her in his basement and tortured her and all of that. Um, and then she forgot what had happened. It got suppressed. And I think it was interesting how she mentions later that those memories were inside of her, all coiled up and hidden, but they were controlling a lot of the things that she was doing. By she, I mean Diana, of course. Um, and I think that's true of a lot of the people I've talked to who have had suppressed memories that they then uncovered. I think it it makes certain things that they've done or choices that they've made that they didn't want to make suddenly make sense because their subconscious was pressuring them into making a choice they didn't want to make because it was safer based on this experience that they didn't remember having. Um, so as an outsider, that was really helpful to me. I think I understand better where people who have had these horrible experiences are coming from. Um, and that was one of the things I really liked about The Stain in general was how um, the negative experiences that Tawny and Mary and Diana have are all very different. But the way that Charlene wrote the story, you can see how the journey that each of them takes emotionally is the same. And you can see how they're all connected and how all of the people around them are connected and how the patterns are are happening again and again until Diana has the impulse to go to this retreat and gets really frustrated with the whole experience because she feels like it's not working for her, but actually it is. Um, which was also a really interesting perspective on meditation where a lot of people who start meditating are like, this is dumb, I'm not doing anything, I'm just sitting here and like I can't keep my mind empty, like this is impossible, and so they give up. But even if you're doing it wrong, or even if it's not how you think it should be, doesn't mean it's not working. um, which was also a very encouraging thing to learn. Um, yeah, so many random things. I learned so many random things. Well, not random, I guess, but things that you wouldn't expect to learn in the same book. Um, yeah, yeah, like um, the part, I guess, in the middle with Mary, and when she's having when she's being forced to have the unsanitary, non-hygienic abortion. That reminded me a lot of Dirty Dancing, and how even in a time very recently, even now, in various parts of the world and in modern society, that's still a life or death choice, um, for the woman. Not I'm like not even getting into issues of the infant being killed or not. The whole procedure, and this sort of made me think about hospitals and healthcare in general, and how everything has come so far in physical healthcare and in mental healthcare, and yet it's still so we still have so much farther to go. um, so many people who need help don't get it because, oh, I don't have a mental health problem, or if I have a mental health problem, then there's something wrong with me, and I don't want anybody to know that, so therefore I don't have a mental health problem. Um, and I think people let their issues define them instead of working through their issues and getting the help that they need to do that properly. So there's a lot of cultural attitudes towards mental health that we need to fix. Um, and then also, hospitals are the breeding ground for all sorts of antibacterial resistant microbial organisms. Um, and and the only effective way of treating that is to use the methods that nature uses. Um, but combining traditional Western medicine, which isn't actually traditional Western medicine, it's like been developed in the past 200 years. Combining that with natural remedies or folk remedies or anything like that is not accepted, even though there's a lot of scientific proof behind a lot of these folk remedies. So it's interesting to think about the parallels between the progression of mental health and the progression of physical, chemical, technological healthcare, um, and how all of that works together. But it also had me thinking a lot of the things that Charlene had to say about these various abusive men is that it's their lack of power, it's their issues that are making them feel inadequate in some way, which is what's triggering them to do the horrible things that they do. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective because um and this goes back to an episode of The Art of Manliness that I was listening to like last year sometime, about rituals around the transitioning, like life phase transitions for men, and how most cultures might have a coming of age ceremony in like early adolescence, but other than that they don't have any sort of ceremony or anything to mark the transitions of life. And I that got me thinking, combining that with reading The Stain got me thinking about how important it is to celebrate the different stages of life for for men and for women, and how when we do those and have those celebrations and do it on purpose, we can teach the children that we know, whether they're our children or our nieces and nephews or our cousins or just the kids of your best friend, you can teach them how to be self-aware, how to know who they are and be confident in who they are, so that you're moving society as a whole away from all of these negative patterns by changing the way we approach gender as a thing, I guess. And I don't necessarily mean making the genders the same, because I think there are important differences between the genders. And I think that those need to be celebrated also. But it shouldn't be prescribed, it should be chosen by the individual person. Um, which probably doesn't make any sense outside of my own head. Sigh. um, but like I watched the Star Wars movie twice this past holiday season, once with my cousin and once with my uncle. And the second time I watched it, I realized that they're setting up Rey to make the same choice that Anakin made that led him to become Darth Vader. Um, except that because of how history has happened in real life, Rey being a woman and having to make that same choice between love or the Jedi has a whole lot of social commentary loaded into it. And in order to be consistent within their own story world, she can't choose both. She has to pick one or the other. And either way is a horrible choice. Nobody should have to pick their job or their family. Um, and it was horrible, 30 years ago when they made Anakin do it. That because he's a guy and because of the time of when that movie was released, it wasn't a thing anybody even considered. That movie predates the real transition from men who are at work all the time and women who are at home to both being equally involved, both at work and at home. So this has to do with the stain, because the stain got me thinking of these gender issues and how we need to somehow figure out a better way of approaching gender equality that doesn't force anyone into any sort of role they don't want to have, and that is inclusive of everyone having the option to be as involved at home or at work as makes sense in their own individual circumstances. So, yeah, I think the two things are very intertwined, and I think that shows a lot in Diana's life. Although Charlene didn't go into too much detail about Diana's professional life, but she did touch on the fact that for so many years Diana's life was in a shambles, and it had a lot to do with this pattern she was in with David, where she was convinced that David was the love of her life, but he was always cheating on her. He was always with someone else. They were never officially a couple. They were just, hooking up whenever they felt like it. Um, and she disappeared. She went to India. She went to the West Coast. She came back. Um, and she had enough skills when she came back to get her professional life in order, but not enough to get her personal life in order. But because her professional life was in order and she had enough of those skills to get her professional life in order, she was able to do things that led to her meeting Jake. And I think, I mean, this is something I'd really like to ask Charlene if she comes back. Maybe I'll email her and post an update. But I don't know, would Diana have met Jake at all if she hadn't had the experiences in India and the West Coast that led her to learning how to become strong in herself? I don't know, but I suspect that the answer would be no. Um, yeah, it's interesting to think about. Oh, and the part about the sort of discussion of suicide. I highlighted this quote. People think suicide happens with great drama inside the person. Not my experience. It was the inner silence, the death of any emotion, feeling, or anything at all. That inner death signaled a need in me to end my physical life. That was really interesting to me. Um, Never having been suicidal, it was an interesting glimpse into how society as a whole views an issue and how the individual experiencing the issue views the issue, and how those are very different most of the time. Um, I remember Tim Ferriss made a post a while back about suicide as well, and mentioning that what stopped him was realizing how selfish it would have been for him to take his life, considering his family. And my dad is of the same opinion as that. Um, and and my dad worked as a psych tech during the Vietnam War, so he has the professional sort of look into it. And it was interesting to sort of see how, oh, well, if you already consider yourself to be dead in every way except the literal, then it suddenly becomes less confusing to an outsider to see why, if nothing matters and everything is dead and you're not there, then why is your body still functioning? Um, it's an interesting thought experiment, I guess. I'm looking through my comments to see what else I want to talk about before. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned a lot from it. Oh, this is another part I liked a lot, is how when Diana is in these meditation sessions and she's feeling uncomfortable, she asks, is it safe? And she understands that, I have this quote, it was safe for her to go on, not pleasant, but safe. And I think that's a really interesting perspective, because I think we so often equate safety with comfort. And I think those two things shouldn't be, I think that association is false. I think a lot of people stay in abusive relationships because they're comfortable. Maybe it's a relationship where the abuse is not physical, it's not upfront in your face. It's the subtle, controlling type of abuse that where you don't have any freedom because you're completely, it's almost like codependence, where you're making or letting someone else control your life because that's easier than being your own person. But then you end up not having any real purpose at all. You can't do whatever it was you were meant to do, if someone else is calling all the shots for you. So that's an instance where you're comfortable, but you're not safe. And I think it's interesting how Diana was putting herself in situations where she was very uncomfortable, but she was okay with that because she had this intuitive knowledge from her meditation practices and her communion with the whole, that she was safe even though she wasn't comfortable. And I think that's a lot similar to how in acting classes, for example, they tell you to go outside your comfort zone if you're doing an improv exercise. Or maybe they talk about this, I guess, in business a little bit, although in business it's a little bit different. But where you're doing stuff, you're learning things, you're pushing yourself to do things you're not comfortable doing, but you take baby steps. So you're safe. Walking 2 steps outside of your door to go get the mail is probably safe, unless you're living in a war zone, I guess. There's always the exceptions, of course. But taking little steps and getting used to going to the mailbox every day to get a little bit of sun and some fresh air. Maybe after a week or two, you are comfortable walking to the end of the block. You do little progressions that push yourself a little bit more every time, and then suddenly you're comfortable and safe at the same time. But you start with safe that's uncomfortable and sort of move your boundaries out, and then you're capable of more, and you have more self-confidence because you can do things that you didn't think you could do 3 or 4 weeks before. And I like that as a reminder that we should all do things we're not comfortable doing. And that was one of the main reasons I decided to structure this book club how I did, was to push myself out of reading my favorites of fantasy and fantasy. So that definitely, it's definitely working. It's been almost a year. Um, and I've definitely read several books that I enjoyed reading that I would not have read otherwise. So I hope you enjoyed The Stain. I hope that you didn't force yourself to finish it if it was too uncomfortable or too not your style or any of that. There's no point in reading a book all the way to the end if it's not your thing. But I hope that you push yourself to at least try, and I hope you learned from it. So I will be back next week. See you then.